Welcome, everybody. Let me know if this is not working in the chat, or yeah. Let's hope it does work. I can hear and see myself, so maybe the rest of the world also does that. We hope to we hope to have a meeting here to share knowledge and information from different movements in Europe, mainly from Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands. But also now added is Portugal and Spain, or Barcelona. And we thought that this would be useful because housing movements, tenant movements are growing, are getting more powerful, and they have the possibility to influence the terrible housing conditions that have been created the last years. So it's good to make use of that power and to try to grow as strong as possible. And we are an informal network that started more or less around the European Action Coalition on housing. We had a meeting in Portugal a few years ago with a huge demonstration, also in Lisbon, and really nice weather there, where we met and people were sharing information, and it appeared that there's so much knowledge in all these movements about real estate markets and those parties, meaning power parties that are making use of it, and the victims and how they organize. And now, of course, in the Corona situation, there have been very little meetings, and also the European Action Coalition was a bit inactive. There are all kind of developments within the international housing movement, so to say, so that there will be new meetings. But in the meantime, there was little possibilities to share this kind of information. So we thought, let's just do it. And we had the whole help of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for the internet, the technical side, also for the content, of course. But so many thanks for that. And this is how this came to be. And today we have two introductions on a national situation, so to say. Gwen van Eyck on the Netherlands. We are organizing a new demonstration in Rotterdam next week, next Saturday, Sunday. That promises to be quite big. After we had another one in Amsterdam a month earlier. And also in Sweden, victories have been achieved. Even the government was brought down by, in fact, demands from the housing movement. Germany, of course, we also know a lot about how strong it has grown in Berlin and some other cities, and in a referendum that was won during the elections 2 weeks ago, about which Knut will tell more. And first we will have a more general introduction by Knut Unger, who's from a tenant union or tenant organization in the Ruhrgebiet in Germany, and also a veteran of housing struggles. So Knut, take over if you want. You're muted.
Yes, hello.
Yep.
I'm since long I'm working with the tenant union in Germany, in Western Germany, not in Berlin. So I do not know all the details about Berlin, but I'm also a member of this activist research group we call Socialise Housing across Europe. And yes, it was very astonishing for us that after the big success, the victory in Berlin, there were other movements growing up so fast, especially in the Netherlands, and that was the stimulus to set up this project as an impulse for developing maybe a longer project on reflecting about the conditions of our struggles and the aims and so on. And we said that there will be two axes.
Oh, you're muted again, Knut.
Sorry, this was the mouse. And yes, and here you find, I put in the chat the link of the public web page of our project. And then we have two axes in this project. One axis is about the situation in the countries or in the regions. And the other axis is about transnational real estate companies. Yes, my main work in daily life is dealing with Vonovia and LEG and others of these very large transnationally active real estate trusts that are listed in the stock exchange. So the first axis we start the debate today, this is called a new cycles of housing struggles, and we want to see the political impacts and also the challenges, the obstacles of the rising tenant movements in our countries, and we focus on the Netherlands and Sweden today, and in another meeting we will focus on Berlin and on Catalonia in Spain. And the second is about resisting transnational landlords. It will be on the 27th at the same time, 6 o'clock. We have no funding. This is important to know that this is not funded by anybody. Our work, also not by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. We are doing this as part or besides our ordinary work. And yes, we called our group Socialization. This is the horizon, the aim. And socialization for me not only means an instrument, it means a needed goal, orientation, a practice of research, which is orientated on transformation, of networking, on organizing, of tenants, action, and advocacy. And all that is connected at the same time. And socialization is not anymore a dream or a crazy idea of some communists. It is a daily practice in Berlin, and it is a part of our thinking about alternatives to the ruling housing markets. And we believe that it is a good option to think about, not only in Germany, but in many other countries as well. As you will all know, the current crisis of affordable housing is the result of the process many people call neoliberalization, especially in Sweden and in the Netherlands and in Germany. We had a kind of welfare state that regulated capitalism 20 or 30 years ago. And this welfare state, part of it was the regulated housing sector, and it was deregulated, and big parts of the former public or regulated housing was privatized and sold in different ways to financial actors, mainly private equity firms. And these private equity firms brought their assets, as they call it, to the stock exchange. And now we have a situation that we have very huge and large and influential companies like Vonovia, not only in one country, but in a couple of countries they are active. And this is a totally new situation for housing. A new situation, of course, also is the heavy rent increases. And thus we have, it is natural that we have reactions in all our countries that somehow are similar. We all react to these business models of the financial industries. We all have a crisis of affordability. People do not find affordable houses anymore. And and also, and therefore the struggles are around rent regulation. That's very urgent in Sweden, for example, but also in the Netherlands, and of course in Germany, also in Berlin, where the struggle around the introduction of a new system of rent cap, of rent regulation, was important before this referendum. On 26th September in Berlin, a majority of the voters very clearly voted for the referendum initiative in favor of expropriating and socializing the housing stocks of all companies and house owners that own more than 3,000 housing units in Berlin. That's only in Berlin. At many places in Germany, and as we know elsewhere, people are now asking, how was that possible? Out from the situation of neoliberalism, suddenly there is a socialist demand. How was that possible? What can we learn from Berlin? Many people ask that. And that needs some research, some investigation, debate, and exchange, which is broader and deeper. And we will not go into these questions today, but in another event in November, probably at 17th November at 6 o'clock. For me, as a person who is not living in Berlin, the most important aspect of this referendum and the whole process of protest in Berlin is that it now, also for us in other parts of Germany, it became possible to think loudly and clearly about a general alternative to further financialization and the industrialization of housing. That was not possible before. Some communists always said in my organization, we have the right to socialize, but now it is a real option, and many people are thinking and speaking about it. Now our task as Tenant Organization is to not to copy to Berlin, but to try to build locally adapted strategies that really can overcome the power of the corporate landlords. And for that, we need always the horizon of thinking about the socialization of property in a radical and also diverse way. And as we will prove today, the contradictory relation between the successes we have had, the victories we partly have, the successes in mobilization, and partly the victories in Sweden and in Germany, are confronted to political powers and majorities in the parliaments that are not that do not really want to implement these demands of a majority of the people. And that, of course, is another situation than just protesting, saying, oh, everything is bad. So we see that we have some power and majorities, but on the other side, we are confronted to governments that do not implement these demands. And this is the actual situation in Berlin, where we had the clear majority for the referendum, but not probably a government that will implement these proposals fully. Yes, and this has some consequences. I cannot go now in the details for the business models of the big real estate owners and of the policies. And there is a very clear picture now that companies like Vonovia are cooperating with the state, and especially also with the Social Democrats within the state apparatus in order to improve some housing conditions, but mainly to avoid any further clear regulation and socialization of the property. And yes, and in this situation, it may become, from a skeptical viewpoint, it may become possible that all our activities are just another pawn in the game of the industrialized housing industries that are cooperating with the state. But in contrast to such skepticism, it of course gives a lot of hope that the housing movements are not only appearing in one city or in a few cities, but in parallel and overlapping at many places, and partly very rapidly, as we saw in the Netherlands. And maybe there is a new cycle of struggles, and housing in this cycle is very important, of class struggle, and the rent rebel will become a main figure inside of this struggle, if that is not just a leftist projection. And our task now is to understand the reasons for the rising movements, their opportunities and obstacles, enemies and possible partners, in order to build strategies that can really establish a social control over land and housing, and which realizes the right for housing for everybody, and which is also climate neutral. So that maybe will be a big point to discuss in another session. And yes, so with my introduction, I hope that I touched a few questions, and you can put your remarks in the pad. Yes, you found it in the chat, the link. And I will also here, there was something more. We'll put this text there in the pad and you can read it. Many thanks and good discussions.
Thank you, Knut. So if people have questions that go directly as clarification for what has been said, this is your chance to ask it. You can put it in the Q&A or in the chat. We were thinking to have this opportunity to like introductions and then short questions for clarification. And then after the 3 or 4 short introductions, we can have a more general debate about the whole cake, so to say. If everything is clear, we can go further with the Swedish situation. Sweden has so long been like this like symbol of a welfare state, and we always thought that housing as one of the most important provisions for people would be well organized there, and as one of the last survivals of the welfare state, it would all be we had this vision of a state that does something for its citizens, especially on the housing situation. But I think there's a different reality in Scandinavia and in Sweden in particular. And Sandra Mandel, who is from the organization Nee till marknadshyra, no to market rents, will enlighten us about that. Sandra, take the floor, the virtual floor. Unmute yourself. We can see you, but not hear you. I hope you heard us. Can she be unmuted by, yeah, there she is.
Okay, now I am with you.
Yes.
I don't exactly know why it was required to get help, but nonetheless, here I am. Well, I want, first of all, to say who I am. My name is Sandra Mandel, and if I happen to say anything that you think you want repeated or you didn't catch, I don't care if you interrupt me. I prefer mostly that we all understand one another. I'm here at the invitation of İlhan Çelioglu, who is also a panelist. And we have a lot of experience of housing agitation. And we are activists, both of us, but he has concerned himself more with the landlord Hembla, and I have concerned myself more with market rent. I'm going to give you a short background. Myself, I belong to a group which is called Nee till marknadshyra, Nee till marknadshyra. And I'm going to type that in the chat. Some of the things I say here, I will type for you. That one is on Facebook. You can find both myself and İlhan on Facebook and become friends to us. and you can join the Nej till marknadshyra. That group is, of course, almost completely in Swedish, all of the things that are put there, but Facebook has a translate button, so you can get a lot of things that are there translated into English or German. To give you a short history, what has happened in Sweden is that Sweden is a welfare state. That was very correctly said, or what is left of a welfare state. And Sweden financed the welfare, that is free education and subsidized healthcare, and also fairly decent housing, with a rather heavy load of taxation. But from 1990 and forward until the present day, we have had a lot of right-wing influence in politics, liberalism, or the best thing we can do is allow a free market. So we have a lot of privatization of schools and healthcare. And people are realizing that what happens is you might be able to get some things cheaper, but you definitely will not get quality care or quality education or good standard housing for an affordable rent. So the municipal housing companies, which were essentially in Stockholm, only 3, they were faced with legislation in the year 2011, which made them into companies where they were allowed to make a profit. And they were encouraged to make a profit, which they did. At that time, not only were they encouraged to make a profit, but the tenants and they themselves were robbed of money, because the municipalities, which legally somehow still owned them, decided that renovation money was going to be counted as a profit and confiscated it for doing different things in Stockholm. But the things they were doing did not include keeping any money for renovations. As time went on, the situation got worse and worse for tenants who are living in what is called the Miljon program. In other words, in the 70s, a lot of houses were built, a lot of apartments were built, decent and affordable housing. But as time has gone on, we've come to the point where they need very large renovations done to the plumbing, for example. And this costs a lot of money to landlords. So what landlords have taken to doing is one of 2 things. I happen to live with a landlord who has renovated my flat and done what I call a package deal. In other words, the landlord has baked into the renovation things which cause the rent to rise. They are not maintenance. There is a heavy debt of maintenance owed the tenants in these Miljon program housing flats. And the tenant that Ilhan belongs to has decided to do what is called concept renovation, which means that when a tenant moves out, they make renovation which is actually cosmetic. Put in a few new cabinets, do some rather temporary work to make the plumbing work better. And then they jack up the rent by 50%, at least for the poor new tenant who moves in after the so-called renovation. A word to describe this, renoviction, or in Swedish, renovräkning, has been coined. And what happened with this, the whole idea that we are approaching what is called market rent. In this year, a proposal for a law was put forward in June, and it said that landlords would be able to put on market rents for newly produced housing. Well, that means that they could charge basically what they wanted to, because market rent simply means what the market can afford or is willing to pay. Well, if you live in a city, Stockholm, where you have to wait 12 years in the queue to get yourself a flat at either the extreme southern tip or the extreme northern tip of the city, and you have some money to pay, you will surely pay through the nose to have someplace where you can put your head and be able to get to work. So this idea was totally frightening to myself and my colleagues. And we decided that we are going to do our best to organize ourselves against it. This idea of market rent was baked into an agreement which all the parties in the government had agreed on, but was pushed forward, especially by the Center Party and, of course, the right-wing group. Well, what happened in June was that this market rent suggestion or law proposal had so much protest against it that the left party, which had said that they would not tolerate having this law proposal be accepted, what happened was that they put their foot down and said, no, we're going to declare misstroende votum. We're going to say that the government is not capable of being in place. And they did that, and the government fell. It was a very big victory for people who are in market rent. And from that time, we also learned that because the left party had said that two paragraphs that had to do with market rent, one of them concerning the attractiveness of where a flat was located, called lägesfaktorn. This one was also scrapped when just basically the day that we decided to have a protest against it, on the 18th of September, and this protest was not only in Stockholm, but concentrated to Stockholm, because there were not a lot of small demonstrations as happened on the 18th of April, but there were large demonstrations in June and also in September. And that lägesfaktorn was also scrapped. What we have in front of us now is a fight against what is called Stockholm's hyra, or Stockholm rent. It is a model which causes points to be assigned to different things that are good about flats so that higher rent can be charged for what is attractive. There is negotiation going on between the Tenant Association, which is a nationwide organization in Sweden and has the right to negotiate rents annually with the municipal landlords and even the private landlords. In other words, it has traditionally had a position of strength in that regard. And Sweden has a pretty unique model in that negotiations determine rents. But in later times here, the Tenant Association has really backed down a lot from the movement it started out as. It started out as a movement of the people, of the grassroots, that they would be able to have affordable rents and decent housing. And we are discovering that unless we organize and keep on moving for better, socially better housing, that we will not get it. But we have many plans in place to keep on moving in that regard. And anytime you wish to have more information about that, we haven't agreed on everything we want to do, but we plan to move forward to push for better housing, not just putting out the fires, but trying to really reform politics so that there will be better politics in place. Ilhan has recently produced a book, and it is Report from Hemla Hell, and you can order that one from him. If he allows me, you may even get an English version. We will see about that. But the most important thing is that this fight is not over yet. It is ongoing. We have had a huge victory, and we are really congratulating ourselves and the people in Berlin. And we pray that everybody else here will also keep on fighting, because the more we are and the longer we fight, the more we are going to get what we want for the people.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra. That is a really clear and short overview of the situation in Sweden, and also a very combative one. and one with perspective. What more can you want? There's no questions being put in the Q&A or in the chat until now, but I had a question. Do you have a explanation why the official tenant organizations back down in this moment?
My own understanding of the tenant association is that they became rather comfortable with being a bureaucratic organization, and they did not want to risk going out on a limb for what appears to be people agitating from the left. But I think that they will not be able to straddle the fence, and they will not be able to hide behind we're still going to carry on negotiations as normal. There's going to be a push comes to shove, and I really hope that the tenant association will keep on existing and will do a good job by the tenants. But I can tell you there's going to be quite a bit of shaking in that organization before they can come to that. They have had a very bad habit of suspending people from their organization for many years or even for life, whom they didn't like for the agitation they carried on. So this is definitely not very encouraging at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds familiar to us in Holland. Not so much the suspending of 2 million, but the bureaucratization of these official tenant representatives. And we are hearing also stories from other countries about a new way of organizing tenants, which is called tenant syndicalism, or yeah, union. It's organizing model for tenant organization. Maybe also from Barcelona we can hear later examples about that. So that is also, there's also things moving there. People that are not feeling represented well by tenant organizations also start to move. I don't know, is there a more questions on Sweden? Knut, I see your hand.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, we have also problems with the big tenant union in Germany. The organizations in Sweden, the Netherlands, and in Germany, I think, are the largest tenant unions inside of the also of the European organization of these tenant unions. So there are many much influential, and it is in our project. It will be a point to be discussed deeper, maybe not in public, about the relation to the traditional tenant unions. Yeah, but my question is: so what? There are myths about Sweden. So Sweden is the best welfare state, and everything is okay. So we learned that housing is not okay anymore, and other things. But there is another myth, and this is the negotiating the rent. Yeah. So people here also in the tenant union and many others say, oh, the model of negotiating the rents in Sweden, this is much better, some people say, than what we have in Germany, which is a regulation of rent increases by law. And because there the people have power, this is the syndicalism, as Keith said. Yeah, in practice, it already exists. You can, so that the tenant organization negotiates, as in labor. Yeah, negotiates with them. What would you tell those people who believe that it is the best model ever, the Swedish model of negotiating the rent?
Somehow the model is a good model, that we have representatives of, we have 500,000 members in the National Tenant Association, and they are represented in annual negotiations. It gives this tenant association some clout. But the problem now is the gap between the people who represent the tenants and what the tenants actually want. just as there many times arises a gap between politicians who are supposed to represent the people who voted them in. So this is going to be a difficult conflict to manage. And I cannot believe, the larger the agitation movement grows, the more activism there is, the more people understand that what is being said is the truth. It's going to be very hard for the tenant association to hide behind things are going on like normal.
Yes, but the negotiating in the trade, if a trade union negotiates an agreement on the salary, it has a power, it has a weapon, it is the strike. Does the tenant union in Sweden have the right to a rent strike or something else? What are the weapons if the other side does not agree to their demands?
Yeah, well, sorrowfully, at one time, how many years ago, 50 years at least or more, tenants had a right to go on rent strike. They no longer have it. Mm-hmm. That would be a powerful weapon. And tenants are going to have to find a way to communicate to their representatives that we want you to represent us and not what is convenient for you. Mm-hmm. And I think actually that they are making some kind of an impression. And I want to tell you that recently the National Congress of the Tenant Association was held, and different motions were put in front of the Congress. But what happened was that the top organ of the organization wanted to have renovations where basically maintenance was put on a priority. But the people who were there, the delegates, insisted that it should not say just low price, but that there must be an alternative with no raise in rent, a renovation which is only maintenance, that had to be an alternative for tenants. And that was nothing that the top of the organization wanted, but they had to put up with it anyway, because it was voted on and it passed.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just a remark to that, we have the same, of course, this is about the maintenance. So we have here the modernization, which is the main reason for huge rent increases and for, as you said, renovations. This is really happening. Yeah, the rent increase after modernization is maybe 30 or 40%, or maybe, yeah. And of course, it pushes people out of the houses, and this is the main struggle here. But we managed in the struggle inside of the tenant union that we say the law that allows this type of modernization with such a high rent increase must be abolished. Yeah, then we would have only one type of, so there is a special right to increase the rents after the modernizations. And we fear that this can, through the European Union, we fear that, and other mechanisms, and of course, Vonovia being an important actor now in the Swedish market, that to try to achieve also such legislation that allows modernization, and the argument, of course, is climate neutrality. Yes, they want to achieve climate neutrality. A lot of money is going, European money and state money is going into these renovations for climate neutrality. And this is their story. And also, again and again, although inside of the tenant union, we have clear decisions that we want to abolish that law and that climate neutrality cannot be achieved on the cost of the tenants. Yeah, again and again, it comes up that because of the climate neutrality, we must be able to compromise, yeah, to allow some rent increases and so on. So we have really, this is a basic conflict. The narrative, what they tell us about climate neutrality in housing, and the real struggle, everyday struggle against these evictions.
One thing you need to know is that the laws of Sweden have been very unfavorable to tenants who wanted to represent their own claims, who wanted to complain about renovations and other things that are in the picture. And we are going to have new laws. We're going to have to agitate for laws against concept renovation and other things. In this city of Stockholm, there is also something called hotellifiering. In other words, there is a landlord which rents out a block of flats to an agent, and the agent then fixes temporary contracts with tenants at unrealistic rents, and the tenants have basically no rights whatsoever. So we have many things that we need to fight against, and market rent was more or less just the beginning. And the laws that we have now, they don't allow, if tenants go and complain about renovations costing them too much rent, we have 97% of the cases judged against them. So we can't continue to accept the status quo. We're going to have to legally change it, put pressure on our political representatives to make changes. But this is a long-term fight. It's not something that can be done in, one demonstration.
Yeah, that is clear. In the chat, someone also says that at the moment the situation in Sweden is that if you go on rent strike, you'll lose your lease agreement. So that's quite a big risk to run.
So one thing that would be very important for many of us, I did not know that there was a time where there was really a right to rent strike in Sweden, and we would like to know about this. How was that regulated? How was that possible? Is that possible that you find it out? Maybe.
Yes. If you, I will just say like this: that I wrote my email address. And you have the possibility to email me, and I will give you a bit of history gladly. But it was considered to be too powerful a weapon, and negotiation for rents was entrusted into the hands of the representatives of the Tenant Association. That was what happened. However, we do have different things that we can do to put pressure on landlords. And one of them is that we can pay our rents just a little bit late every month and annoy them no end, because getting their money late is nothing they want, but we can legally do that. So we will see where we wind up.
Yeah, I think other countries also have a history of rent strikes, like the Netherlands had it also quite some time ago. So it would be nice maybe to have the political economy of rent strikes booklet or something like that coming out of here. But Ilhan, I see your hand.
Ilhan, yes.
Thank you. Nice that you're here, Sandra, and giving us the news about Sweden to the rest of Europeans. I was thinking about this question about the organization about this campaign about no to market rents. We had a lot of local initiative, as you were into, where we had like 155 demonstrations in different kind of parts in Sweden. And these organizations are very local ones, local tenant unions that made this demand. And as you said, the bigger organization was coming into the campaign much later on. And now you're having these discussions to increase the level of attention towards the housing policies in Sweden. Have you decided or have common demands regarding with the local organizations that you have been organizing with today, that you are putting forward to the politicians or as demands for further mobilization?
I will say no. What we are doing is discussing these demands at the moment. We have something like 13 or 14 big demands, and essentially hammering on the most important item. What we want is for much more housing to be built with affordable rents so people can move in, because there is a tremendous need of these flats. And even if we manage to get that one through, we will have succeeded to a very large extent in making Stockholm a better place to live. You mentioned that there were 155 or even 160 something mini demonstrations on the 18th of April. The no to market rent engaged people from all the way in the north of Sweden, in Kiruna, down to the southern edge, Gothenburg and Malmö and Stockholm. It was historic. I don't think I have seen the Swedish people get involved in a question, a political question, to that extent since the Vietnam War. And that was, as you know, about 50 years ago. So these are exciting times that people are standing up for the fact that they want to be treated as if they are human beings when it comes to housing, and not, I mean, the laws even referred to tenants as customers, and to their ability and willingness to pay. So where was the housing as a basic human right? It wasn't anywhere in the legislation that was proposed. And that's one of the things we also want. We want something that Leilani Farha, who visited us from the FN, she pushed for something called the switch, and it's in a film called Push, which you can Google on YouTube and try to see. And it talks about how big risk capital companies come in, take over low rent housing and build it up a bit, and I mean, then rent it out to much higher rents than it really is worth, all for the sake of giving their stockholders more money, not caring what happens to the tenants, many of whom wind up on the street. So you can see that this business of what we have to do, where we are impressed with ourselves, but we didn't have any money to make all these demonstrations. There was no money coming from the tenant association, but many of the members in the tenant association knew that the issue of market rent was even something that their own association had, with at least lip service and the possibility to sign the names on internet, said that they were against. However, there were no demonstrations organized by the tenant association. Any demonstrations were organized by other groups. And there were 90 organizations which backed the Nej to marknadshyra. So I believe that this is a grassroots movement, a genuine grassroots movement. And I don't think it will stop only with what happened in getting rid of the worst law proposals we have seen in years for market rent and lägesfaktorn.
Okay, thanks again. You sound like the syndicalist leader of the tenants in Sweden.
No,
no,
I know who she is.
Oh,
her name
okay.
is Ellen.
Okay.
Her name is Ellen, and recently she received threatening language from the tenant association that she better read the statutes for keeping on belonging to the organization.
Oh, that's a good compliment always when they tell that to
she's
you.
doing a job well enough to make it hurt for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. If we have to leave it here, of course, it is always very interesting. We could go on longer. In the chat, there's all kind of literature being presented, and even the email addresses of the people who wrote books on rent strike. So that's going well. And so this is a good moment to go. We are exactly on schedule to go to the Netherlands, where it is exploding in a way. Also, suddenly there's lots of activities, and it's the same story. I think it is a grassroots. It's not the tenant organizations who started to organize the protest against abysmal living conditions in the cities now, but all kind of grassroots organizations, and suddenly it is popping up everywhere, and demonstrations with of course still a lot of work to do, but they become bigger than they ever were. One just anecdote is that we are organizing this demonstration in Rotterdam, which is like the national demonstration to demand change in the housing policies. And we needed lots of money, we thought. First, we thought 2,000 euros, but then everybody said, no, there will be so many people. You need like stages and toilets and whatever. So we made more the budget bigger and bigger, and then we thought, oh, we'll never get 10,000 euro, and now we got even more than we asked for without having to do much. So that's only money, of course, not the most important thing, but I think it's illustrative for how easy it is now to mobilize. There's buses coming from all kind of organizations. But of course, it's not the solution only to have a demonstration. And Gwen van Eyck, who is one of the organizers of the demonstration of Rotterdam under the name of Woonopstand, I'll put the website in there. But she's also a local from Rotterdam, where she does criminology on the university also, I think. And she's from Recht op Stad, which is like right to the city in Rotterdam. Please explain us what is happening in the Netherlands, and also what the specific situation, because it's a bit complicated. It's also one of those old welfare states with some of their institutions still existing, and most of them completely co-opted by neoliberal institutions. So Gwen?
Yes, what the hell is happening in the Netherlands? Yeah, so as Kay said, I'm involved in organizing a demonstration this Sunday in Rotterdam. Woonopstand translates as housing revolt. And it's a coalition of about 15 action groups, grassroots groups, and more institutional action groups. I'm also involved in a local action group, Right to the City, that's right, and we're part of this coalition. The coalition actually goes back to last year, March 2020. This was before my time. They were also planning a demonstration, but because of Corona, apparently, or obviously that didn't happen. So the demonstration in Rotterdam is going to be the second national demonstration. The first was in September in Amsterdam. It was organized by a different group. 15,000 people came to that demonstration, which was just, it's unusual to see such numbers of people for this kind of topic. So the two organizations in Amsterdam and the Rotterdam demonstration, both national demonstrations, they joined up, and we said, well, what we need actually is a series of national demonstrations. So we've seen several cities organizing their own demonstrations. So The Hague is doing a demonstration in November, as well as another city in the north of the Netherlands. So that's what we're hoping for, that this the bandwagon effect, that because of obviously one demonstration is not going to get us very far. Yeah, I think one of the aims is to really change the conversation around housing, to change the conversation that we're talking about the rights, the human rights to housing. Well, one of the effects, I think, of these demonstrations is that everyone is talking about housing. There's a lot of media attention, and also for the more unfamiliar topics, previously unfamiliar topics, such as the financialization and the role of investors, or vulture investors, vulture funds, as Leilani Farah calls them. Even though it's been a problem, the housing situation, for a very long time, the number of unhoused people has doubled in the last decade. There are about 40,000 registered unhoused people, but probably it's more like 100,000. 800,000 people are not able to pay the rent. So that's that's a lot of problems that exist longer, obviously. So the housing situation, since the 80s, it's been a deliberate policy nationally to minimize the social housing sector, to de-invest in housing corporations or housing associations, as they once were, but they're called housing corporations, and to really promote home ownership by financial or tax incentives, and to really say, let's leave it to the market to provide housing, and social housing should only be for the lowest income groups. And in 2013, this is even worsened. The government is now taxing social housing. So housing corporations pay taxes for their housing stock, which meant they build fewer houses, they do less maintenance, the rents have gone up. And there's a lot of discussion about these negative effects, obviously, of the social housing tax. But still, there's no, it provides the government with a lot of money. It was, that's one of the reasons that it was introduced, because the government needed money. So they decided it should come from housing corporations, which basically means it comes from tenants. Tenants pay for that taxes. So what's happened is that the inequality between tenants and homeowners has really grown. And as it's become more difficult to access social housing, private rental landlords, they have the luxury of raising the rents. Rents in the private sector are largely unregulated. So that's something that we really want to change. Also, 5 years ago, there was a new law introduced, which made it possible for landlords to offer only temporary rental contracts for 2 years. And then you can just, with no reason, you can say, okay, I want a new tenant. So we see a lot of insecurity in housing. And this enables landlords to raise the rents every 2 years, because you can raise the rents to market prices once your tenant is has moved out. So what's been called generation rent, I believe in Ireland, or maybe it's used more broadly. Huge numbers of people are moving every 2 years and paying huge amounts of rents for very small apartments. So what we demand, together with the Amsterdam protest group, we've written a housing manifest with 10 demands. And basically we want housing policy which ensures and guarantees and realizes the right to housing, and in more concrete ways that means more affordable housing, security of tenants, making the providing housing for unhoused people, making that a top priority, obviously. And really turn this development, decade-long development of market privatization and financialization of housing, to turn that around, basically, and say that the government needs to regulate housing more, invest more. We need at least 4 billion euros per year invested in social housing. But also we hope with this movement to really mobilize people around this topic, tenants, but also other people, because the cost of buying a house is just really spun out of control as well. But also to empower people to join the housing movement, to join the various local action groups, and join the collective struggle for the right to housing. As I said, the housing revolts that we're organizing in Rotterdam is organized by a coalition, and I think we all feel well supported and stronger for joining together in this movement, and we hope that this is the beginning of a more broad movement. I'm thinking, where should I go after this introduction case? What else do you want to hear from me or other people?
Yeah, if there are questions, I see Rita, her finger. Otherwise, I also will put my question. But Rita?
I have two questions. One is about the impact of that court decision of European Justice Court that said that the Netherlands could not support so much social housing or something like this. I would like to know, after these years, what is the impact, what was the impact and what came out of this decision that comes from European Union and the Justice, the Court of Justice, I think. And the second question is about taxes. I wanted to know, if you know more or less, maybe not, how much taxes pay the transnational investors and the vulture funds, just to... That's it.
About the vulture funds paying taxes, I don't think we have a very clear picture yet of what they're up to, because basically this has become a sort of mainstream topic, also for journalists, just very recently. Obviously, many people have written about this, have been warning for years. But I think it's become a mainstream topic recently. But just recently there was news about Blackstone and tax evasion. Is it tax evasion or avoidance? Yeah, tax evasion.
Yeah, not paying any taxes at all. Yeah,
not paying any taxes, and that being legal in some sort of way. Well, so yeah. Probably they're not paying so much taxes. Also, this social housing taxes that the government, that the housing corporations need to pay. In theory, private landlords would also pay these taxes if they would provide social housing below a certain rent price. But for private landlords, it's become very unattractive to provide social housing because you need to pay taxes. So yeah, in practice, it's only the corporations who pay these taxes, and the private landlords, they pay no taxes at all. They pay other taxes, obviously, but they are taxed much less. Which is the world upside down. Obviously, social housing providers need to be able to invest and not pay taxes. So this is part of a deliberate policy that has been going on for decades to minimize the social housing. The European Court of Justice, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Maybe this is a couple of years ago, and Kees, do you know?
Yeah, in fact, what they decided was the other way around. They, because it was a few Dutch housing corporations that went to the European Court of Justice to demand that they would not have to impose a very strict income demand for people to be able to rent social housing, and they got their right to do that. Because the Dutch government was using the fact that the European Union had some very vague, rule about social housing only you could only provide it to low income groups, and the corporations thought it was set much too low in the Netherlands, and they got their right. So they were supported by the European Court. So it didn't solve it completely, but it loosened it a bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
But it's still a problem that it's the level is very low, and actually there's been studies that show, particularly areas where there's a lot of social housing. Social housing is also for people with a certain income level, but also for everyone moving from homeless institutions, what's it called, or from health institutions. So it's a population that you see more social problems, and they're concentrated in certain areas right now, which causes some a concentration of problems, basically. So this is one reason why you would not want this concentration of social housing with this low level income level. And also it gives municipalities reason to say, okay, we need to demolish part of these neighborhoods because they have too much social housing, and we should mix them, which leads to displacement. So it creates all sorts of problems, basically.
Yeah, thank you. I have to cut you short. Sandra had a question, and Knut after that. Maybe you can be short, because then we stay on schedule.
Well, first of all, Gwen, the best thing I can say to you is that I'm very happy that you are engaged in standing up for yourselves. And although I know very little about what happens in Holland or the Netherlands, as the country is also called, I would be grateful if you actually sent a few comments to me. But what I do understand is that somehow you have a lot of education ahead of you that is causing people to understand how very important what the work you are doing is. So the only thing I feel, the best thing I can say to you is keep on trucking, keep on going, do not give up.
Yeah.
Because I believe you're going to make a good impact. But I understand that it is a bit uphill.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think people, it's also a very complex problem. Obviously, housing it's about unhoused people, which is all too often forgotten because so many young people and young professionals in the young middle class are hurt by the housing system as well. But it's a very complex problem with many different kinds of victims, sort of say. Well, we really make an effort to bring these groups together and to let people know this is a joint struggle and we're in the same struggle here. But it makes it complex to tell what's the story about, because you can talk about financialization, unhoused people, the neighborhood development, local level, national level. So it's really, there's a lot of education as well to do, which we are also very happy to do. And I think this webinar actually helps also to do that. Yeah. Thank you for your affirming words. I appreciate it.
Okay, I see Knut and Ilhan wanting to say something.
It's just for the thanks for the report and for the future debates. It would be very good to have these 10 demands you spoke about, to have it written and maybe focus on that to understand. So it's important, I think, to understand your 10 demands.
Yeah,
it was very short. And then what I kept is there is this ongoing transformation of the so-called housing associations into corporations and so on. And this is the specific type of neoliberalizing the non-for-profit, former non-profit sector in the Netherlands. And this is a step-by-step process. In Germany, it happened at once. The law on non-for-profit, we called it housing for public benefit, was abolished in 1990. So at once, and that was the start, the precondition to sell all these formerly non-profit houses to the financial actors. And so that would be good if you could understand more, maybe later in the process, how this is happening step by step in the Netherlands. And then, of course, the security of tenure and the short-term contracts, that's a very important struggle. So in the Netherlands, they introduced the possibility of short-term contracts. Before you had open-ended contracts.
Well,
yes, in Germany, we still have, it's normal to have open-ended, but this precarization of housing solutions, that's very important that we confront this and that we make it very clear. But my short question only is, in all this, do you discussing the option of socializing, so of re-socializing, for example, these housing corporations, transforming them back into social organizations? Are you discussing that? We would call that socialization, maybe. Not only the expropriation of the already finite with Blackstone and so on, but also the transformation of this still regulated segment.
Yes, I think also to add to the comments here, I think what's also difficult in this conversation is that the Netherlands still has a relatively large social housing sector and a large, which is provided by corporation if you compare to other European countries. And this is also a reason for many actors, the government or private actors, to say, well, but it's huge and we need to minimize it because it's, I mean, it's no reason really to say it's huge, so we need to minimize it. But it makes the conversation difficult because it's easy for people to think that everything's going well here and everything is not going well. I think we don't talk enough about the socialization of housing. I think there's definitely a need for a conversation about the democratization of housing, which is now definitely not. It's not part, I think, of the vocabulary. So yeah, I think we're looking for ways to address that, and definitely what's happened in Berlin, the referendum. We've invited a housing activist of Berlin to talk about the referendum and talk about the idea of enteigenen. What's the English word?
Expropriation.
Sorry?
Expropriation,
of course, yeah. Because we want to start that conversation in the Netherlands. Yes, definitely. So that's what on Thursday or Sunday, the Sunday the demonstration is. We're going to start that conversation. Yes, because we really need to think about who, because the corporations are also not doing the tenants a favor often by raising rents, not doing any maintenance, demolishing neighborhoods without letting people have a say in where they end up. So this is a struggle that's targeted at the government, but also the corporations. On the one hand, we're side by side in the struggle, but on the other hand, we really want the housing corporations, to change as well. So as I said, it's a complex problem with very many factors. But yeah, I hope I can say more about this in the near future.
Yeah, just to explain, when we talk about corporations in the Netherlands, it's housing associations in a way. It's a very old institution that started in the early 1900s, and it's like a public-private kind of solution that the state finances associations to build social housing, and they still exist. And they became very bureaucratic and very big, and also they became financialized themselves. So they started to speculate with their housing stock and things like that. It's a dramatic story in a way.
Yeah, there are many more things to tell, but we need a different webinar for that.
Yes, let's do that one time. Let's have Ilhan's question as a last, and then go further.
Yeah, thank you. You Knut already had a lot of questions there, which was very interesting. But I was thinking about how you started this organization, because as we understand, the situation in the Netherlands now is quite explorative. You know, it's increasing very fast. But you had, with the aim, you know, a series of demonstrations, and aim to have a change of debate. But how did you organize this? I mean, it seems, as you're saying, 180,000 people cannot afford to pay their rent and so on. So surely there was boiling in the stew, as you say. But how did you organize the people to act in that way that they did? Because what we have heard from Sweden and what we are hearing from Germany, they have direct demands. I mean, they are against this and for this. But you are, in a general way, having 10 demands, having general discussion about housing issues in Netherlands.
Yes. So this organization it's a coalition of 15 groups that already existed, such as the Union for Precarious Housing, an action group, We Refuse the Rent Raise, Right to the City joined this year, and well, various other groups. So these groups existed and were operating, I think, mostly locally, and they joined to organize something on a national level. I think in March 2020, there was the European Housing Action. So that's what they joined for. This was before I joined them, so that's so I'm not sure entirely how that was organized, but definitely I think Right to the City in Rotterdam is also organized that way. There were different neighborhood groups and different local initiatives, and they met up at various points and then decided we need to join up and we need to take this to a higher level, because we have some very common problems, common struggles, and we're much more effective if we join. So Right to the City, our demands to the Rotterdam government are very different than an action group focused on rent raises. But we have common things, many things in common, obviously. So I think this is quite unique, actually, in the Netherlands for groups who have different histories, and they come from different perspectives to join, and it's working out very well, actually. But I think it is quite unique in the Dutch context anyway. I can't speak for. I hope to hear more about these kinds of collectives in other countries as well.
Yeah, thank you. I missed half of it because suddenly I didn't have any sound anymore. But I trust you had a good explanation, Gwen, of how. Yes, and we can see it back in the recording later. So if there is no more pressing questions now, I don't think in the chat it's also there's things there, but not directly about the Dutch situation. Then we can proceed with Rita, and then Lorenzo about Barcelona or Catalonia maybe. And they have to be even shorter than the previous two. so that we have some time to have some kind of a general debate also about where this all can go to and how we can defeat these monsters that are putting us on the street. So Rita.
Okay, thank you, Kees. I'm going to try to be quick because it is a long talk already. I'm very happy to be here in this space, and I hope this is going to continue and we can go further in our discussion. I think we have so much to talk and to organize, so this is a start. So I will try to contextualize very quickly the situation in the Southern Europe, because we were talking about realities that are in the north that are very different, even if we have a lot to exchange and to learn with each other from the north and south perspectives, and even I think from the Eastern Europe too, we also need that input. I think we need to go deep on understanding the process and mechanisms that are going on, and a new rentership model is being developed by Capital, which is changing the cities in the north or in the south or in the east, and is impacting very much our lives. And there are new real estate and new financial actors and logics. And I think we should see very well what is the role of the state, which is very important. And like this, we can know better how and why we oppose this. So in the Southern Europe, what I wanted to say about the Southern Europe, and there are here more people that are very good to speak about Southern Europe countries, it is very marked by decades of home ownership policies, which have a lot of problems in terms of segregation of a part of the population that has no access to finance, or to household indebtedness, and to our even private external country indebtedness, which was very strong in the emergence of the global financial crisis. And also it gave rise to a fragmented market, which brings difficulties for transnational investment to enter. And we have a society of homeowners, and this has implications even for the struggle. So this is things that we should take into consideration. But this is changing. And the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008 brought a reconfiguration of housing and the financial political economy, at least in Portugal, and I think in Spain, and even in Greece, I think it was the case. So the global financial crisis was an opportunity for transnational financial actors to enter in a massive way in each economy. And the Southern European states, very much pushed by European Union, developed different kinds of policies that helped in different ways the entrance and the operation of financial actors in housing, feeding, speculation, and rent extraction. From the imposition of selling the housing stock of non-performing loans from the banks that were in trouble, instead choosing to do this instead of rescuing households and transferring all these to the profits of private transnational actors, but also privatization, liberalization, and precarization of rental market, with, for example, imposing, for a time, with the memorandum of Troika, we didn't have even a limit minimum for the contracts, rental contracts. So it could be a 2 or 3 months contract. Now we have 3 years. And of course, it's not good, it's very precarious. And also the government created a lot of incentives to foreign investment and to financial investment, and different kinds of measures to create markets for them. So, and also recently, there is the tendency for the creation of public-private partnerships, with the financial actors for what they call now affordable housing, which is not affordable and is a new financial scheme for the rates, for example, to enter in Portugal. So what I wanted to put here in the center of this presentation is that the interventionism of the state protecting and helping the operation of these financial huge global actors is overwhelming. And this is a very important topic for us to continue to explore, I think, because there is this narrative that the state should not interfere to regulate, and the state doesn't interfere, isn't it? And the market regulates, and but actually governments intervene a lot, but they are intervening a lot protecting these big money and monopolies. So and they avoid very much to politicize housing. They just say that for us to solve the housing problem, we need to raise supply. And of course, they want to raise the supply of housing in the market because it's more assets for them to explore. But they don't want to politicize housing because they don't want to regulate, and they don't want to they don't want people to understand that the government is really helping them and not helping people. So when they say they cannot do a rent control, because we cannot, here in Portugal is very much a taboo, and any political party has the courage here to talk about this, which is very sad. We have to say that a lot of interventionism is being done by the state against people. So so what I wanted to say is that Southern Europe is being transformed to very much focus on the rent extraction, even if the home ownership also continues, but also tourism, also the luxury havens for speculation, tax avoidance, and even to buy citizenship. And all this is done to fuel real estate and financial complex, which the southern economies are very much dependent historically. So I just want to say that the impact of this, for example, in Portugal, very quick, is that between 2011 and 2018, real estate prices for per square meter rose by an average of 48% within the municipality of Lisbon, but around the metropolitan area rose a lot too. And some parishes had a dramatic rising of 92% during the same period. Yes, it's horrible. Very, very horrible. And the rental prices in Lisbon have risen around 71% between 2013 and 2018. This is post-Troika intervention and global crisis. And of course, our salaries and income are not rising, but as you know, we lost a lot of income also with the financial crisis. So there is this rising and skyrocketing prices of homes that are transformed as assets for foreigners that come here not paying taxes. And there is our impoverishment. So unfortunately, what I see is that we have this horrible, as Sandra said, reality, but we are in unfortunately, we are in a down period of the struggle. We were going good until the pandemic, and with the pandemic, things are strange and blurred. There is the government during the pandemic suspended the evictions, so this was good. But this, sorry, I have people entering at home. But this also, I think the struggle is a little bit in a low moment, and I think, but we are going to overcome, I think, this. So I think well, our comrades from Catalonia and Spain here, they have much to say about their struggles and the rent control that they could push, and also this new law of housing. And I think it's very interesting to also include our Spanish comrades here. I just want to say one last thing, is that I think we need to speak and converge around an alliance to promote rent control across Europe. So we need to reinforce each other around rent controls. I think that is very strategic and a priority. And in certain places, it is really a taboo. It is also almost forbidden to talk about that. But in other places, people are pushing and investing, or even stopping the losses. So I think my proposal is that we continue to speak about rent control and to do an alliance about that. And thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Rita works with Habitat, organization of housing activists in Portugal, I forgot to say, but she's also a researcher at the university in Lisbon. And Lorenzo, you are from Barcelona, I think. From the Tenants Organization there. And of course, your mayor became famous as being the first housing activist that became a mayor. I don't know if that helped your struggle or not, but
a little bit, but
a little bit.
The situation on the ground it deteriorates anyways. At the municipal level, there's not that much that can be done. Government.
Okay.
So should I start?
Yeah, please.
No, well, I'm a member of a neighborhood syndicate in Barcelona. It's one of dozens of local housing syndicates all over the city and the country. But we also collaborate with the Catalan Tenants Union and also the mortgage holders platform. And Rita did much of the context, so I'll try to not repeat and go down to more kind of like our praxis maybe. But basically, we've been facing the international investment funds since about 2013, when they started landing in Catalonia, because, you know, from the mortgage crash came more demand for rental housing. And as she explained, there's a series of reforms that allowed these international investors to arrive. They took over large portfolios from the banks. They had tax exemptions and favorable rates in investment context. Rental market was liberalized. So we got this landlords landing, sharp rent increases and evictions in the context of rising rental prices. And the big names behind these are Blackstone, which is the largest corporate landlord in Spain now, with around 40,000 flats, but also many others such as Cerberus or Lone Star. I don't know if these ring a bell for you guys, but they're quite well known now in Barcelona. And it's in these kind of anti-eviction pickets that these neighborhood housing syndicates start to form. There's anti-eviction pickets weekly, and also the first tenant unions. So we're talking about a grassroots, assembly-based and quite decentralized movement. But there's spaces for collaboration, and it combines a kind of direct action and political lobbying. The thing is that our practice is very conditioned by the property landscape that we have, which is very atomized. So in Barcelona, only 1/3 of the rental stock belongs to owners with more than 10 flats. The rest belong to smaller, medium owners. And corporate landlords with more than 10 flats are only 12% of the rental stock. So much of our struggle has actually involved fighting for and negotiating with residents on an individual case-by-case basis. But improved organizing is slowly allowing also for broader like collective struggles and negotiations of tenants living in properties under the same landlord, which is kind of a qualitative improvement on what we had before. And some of these have had some successes, for example, against Blackstone. Many have taken place in negotiations with people refusing displacement or rent hikes after the termination of their contracts, and continuing to pay the same rent to the courts instead of to the landlord until a fair deal was reached. In some cases, empty flats of these blocks have also been squatted to add pressure on the owner. And we've had conflicts where different blocks have batched together to try to negotiate collectively with these corporate landlords. This is at the organizing level where we're at. At the policy level, tenant pressure has also achieved some important gains in the past few years. So contracts have been reduced from 5 to 3 years, and now they've been put back to 5 years and to 7 years for corporate landlords. So there's been an increase, but they're still temporary. The whole open-ended contract is science fiction in our context, but it is one of our main demands. And in September 2020, a rent control law was passed in Catalonia. So this was a very important moment because basically a price cap linked to an index was put in. This index reflects kind of the average prices of an area. And all those rental contracts above that index have to be gradually reduced to it. Whereas all those rents below the index are frozen and cannot be increased to it. That was the Catalan law, and it's been working quite well, although because it's been challenged for its constitutionality in the Spanish courts, many of the landlords are trying to find ways of not implementing it, etc. And another big news was that the Spanish government announced that they would start introducing rent controls in a new housing law last week. This is a big step, considering what Rita said, that this was a taboo until recently. But the truth is that this Spanish law is kind of a watered down version of the Catalan one. It only places rent caps for large corporate landlords. And as I mentioned before, this is actually a very small percentage of the whole stock. So that housing that's actually going to be affected by the law is quite reduced. And it does include price freezes for current contracts in areas where the market is considered very overheated. But the question is open because regional governments have the option whether to deploy this measure or not. So the ones that are governed by the right wing will not employ this rent control law. And this rent control law still has to be presented officially, so we don't know what the detail is. And the devil is in the detail many times, and there's going to be a struggle first to improve it, extend it, and also for the Catalan law not to be taken down and substituted by this more watered down version. So in terms of like our strategic perspectives now, at the level of organizing, it's to try to consolidate and improve this collective bargaining belonging to the same landlord. And in this sense, in Catalonia, there's a movement-wide campaign to force Cerberus, which is one of the most important culture funds, into a collective bargaining agreement. So we're trying to translate strategies of the labor movement into the housing movement this way. And at the policy level, as I said before, it's to protect current rent controls and make them more widespread. In terms of socialization and all the question about public ownership that you guys were mentioning, there's this public-private institution called La Sareb, which acquired many of the toxic housing assets and has been selling them off since. And there's a campaign to get them transferred into public social rental housing. So that's one avenue towards that, because our rental housing stock, public rental housing stock, is around 1% of the total. So it's, very, very low. And then there are demands, for expropriation of large landlords, etc., but they haven't gone beyond generic demands within a list of other demands. So we're still far away from, in terms of concrete actions in that direction. The question is that we are not quite sure what these international funds strategies are in the medium term, how long they're planning to stay, and what they're going to do. Now, for the moment, they've been selling some flats to individual home ownership. And on the other, they've been partnering with rental management companies and services to manage the rental stock that they're keeping for the moment. But we don't know if other organizations with more, with a longer history in actually managing corporate housing, maybe like Bonovi and such, will decide to come down south or not. But anyway, we'll be waiting for them. So I think I'll leave it at that to leave some space for debate. But that's pretty much very shortly what's going on in Barcelona.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lorenzo and Rita, because we took you like together as like the Iberian representatives of this debate. But if there are questions, of course, we can ask them, but we can also like slowly go over to more general discussion. We only have 20 minutes left if we want to end at 8, which is good because you should not go on forever, I think, even when it's interesting. And my question would be to Lorenzo, because you have a left-wing government, is it pressure from the housing movements that made them introduce this law, or were they trying to like save their next election, or what do you think was the forces that made this move?
Well, I think there's a general climate of dispersed conflict around housing that's there weekly, with evictions being stopped in every neighborhood on a weekly basis. It's almost like a persistent, long lack of normality in the streets, basically. So the police have to be deployed. The riot police have to be deployed every week in Barcelona to try to make evictions actually happen. So this is the climate. But at the level of high politics, yeah, we have a coalition government where there's a smaller, more left-wing partner. The tenants unions have quite a lot of direct contact with them. And, they're trying to, the same way that I guess in Sweden, the left-wing government, the left-wing party tried to draw a red line to differentiate themselves a bit from the Social Democrats. Podemos, in this case, has really taken the housing issue as one of the issues where it can differentiate itself with the more moderate left. So they've put in a lot of pressure in that logic as well. But I think that there's a general climate where something had to be done in one way or another.
Yep.
But obviously, the right-wing opposition is incredibly against any improvement in tenants' rights. They've come out to say that this new law is, a direct attack against private property, etc., etc. So that is the context.
Yep. And for the general, for us all, I think the example that is coming from your region is that rent control is possible, could be like the normal situation. Because Rita said we should maybe make this an international campaign to demand rent control and better rent control, because in some countries it exists, but on a very superficial level. So I think the examples of countries where it is implemented and it functions are valuable for all of us. So-
I would have the question, can you explain a little this rent index? So how does it work in Barcelona?
It's an index that's been created by the Generalitat, which is the regional government. They basically take an average of the rent in a certain area for housing with certain characteristics. So if you have an old house without a lift and no I don't know, heating, it gives you a median of what the prices for those houses in that area. So it is still based on market rents, which is a problem because it was calculated in a moment in which the property prices were quite high before COVID. It's based in 2019 prices. So the prices were quite high. They've dropped since because of COVID as well. So it's quite a high level, but because it's a median, many of the ones that are above it are going to be forced to go down. And the other important thing is that the ones that are under it cannot go up to it either. So that kind of makes it a bit better. But the index itself is based on the market rate for that kind of flat in that particular area.
And it is possible to, if you have a high rent, to reduce the rent or not?
In new contracts, yes.
New contracts
if it's above.
New contracts can be above the index?
No.
No.
No? Okay, they
No.
have to keep
Only in a new build.
Only in new build. And
There's
if
an
you are
exception for
already
new build.
living in having a high rent, can that be reduced?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
But only
With the
you
new
said,
contract.
yeah, when they renew the contract.
Because of the renewal of the contract. Okay,
Yeah.
with the new
Yes.
contract you can reduce. Okay.
Exactly.
So
And is this for all levels of rent or only for the low part of it?
I didn't understand, sorry.
Is it in general for people that pay rent? Everybody can
Yes,
make use of it.
it's-
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a
because-
few exceptions, for example, with this new build and with this very restricted definition of vulnerable landlords. But it's so restricted that it's not very relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, let me shortly comment on that because it is near to the German traditional legislation. We have this type of, we call it rent mirror, so the index of the average of a local rent based on different categories, yeah, and this replaced real rent control. We had a real rent control all over Western Germany also until the 60s, and in Berlin it existed a little longer, and that's one of the reasons why the rents now in Berlin increased so fastly, yeah, because they had a real rent cap before. And we are we are not happy with this type of index. And but the difference is in your case that the rent cannot be increased for new contracts. This is called in our country rent break. Yeah, it reduces the process of rent increase. And as we saw in the past years, it was not introduced early, but in some years ago, but it does not work. The rent break mostly does not work. The rents are continuing to explode. And yes, and therefore the more radical demand is a real rent cap. That means if that the state fixes a maximum rent at a local level, and nobody is allowed to demand more rent from the tenants. And we have open-ended contracts. This is normal in Germany, so we don't have the problem with the renewal of the contract. And this law was such a law of a rent cap that was built on the tradition of the rent cap that existed since the First World War, was introduced by the government in Berlin, a regional government, and it failed at the Constitutional Court. This is a big conflict now and friction, and important. And it's interesting that you're now getting in a similar situation regarding the relation of between the central state and the regional states. So the regional states are following different orientations in the housing policies, and that's also a big issue here in Germany. If you have a left-green government, they may want to have a rent control, strict rent control, or even socialization. And in other parts of the country, you do not have that. And this also has a long story also in social housing. And so I understand this regionalization as an instrument and weapon of neoliberalization, because all improvements now we discuss for rent control or other things, and in allowness of a regional state to do something if it wants, but then it depends on the regional forces and all these things, and it's always a long struggle to achieve that. And I think we must here discuss the opposite, a more universal call for rent controls, not a regionalization, but a Europeanization, so similar conditions in Europe.
Yeah, but that struggle is
Please, Rita wants to say something.
Oh, sorry.
Rita wants to say something.
Sorry, Rita.
Not so important, but just I know there is something around áreas tensionadas in this law of rent control that I don't understand very well. What is this? And maybe Lorenzo can explain. And I just wanted to say that in the South, for us to speak about rent control is really a difficulty. And there is a huge ideological offensive against it. And I think there is around the world. If we go to see the books of Hayek and Friedman, they wrote about all the things they can put of arguments against rent control. And the offensive is very strong. And even certain laws can even face the opposition of constitutional courts and these kind of things, because they are saying that they are going to do this. And in Germany, in Berlin, that also happened. So I think the edge of the struggle is really much on this rent control, because this can cut very much the profits of these big investors, big landlords. And these big landlords, they need to grow every time, and they really need to make a huge amount of profits, because they are dealing with a lot of money that is from credit, borrowed money, and they have to share it in their participants in the funds. So they really have a huge amount of need to make profit. And the rent control, I think, would be a kind of a socialization, and that we should talk about this. Of course, also public and social housing, we are still very interested on that, because we just have 2%, Spain is 1%, this is very few, but the rent controls, and of course, what we can achieve with our rent controls sometimes is very little comparing with other rent controls that we have in history and in other regions.
Yeah, you could say rent control is very important as long as there is no social housing, affordable housing for everybody. Then that is the main battlefield in a housing state. I think we have to start wrapping up. Ilhan, are you agreeing with us?
I am totally agreeing. Start to wrap it up. But I can hear that, yeah, we are talking about rent control. We are talking about expropriation as well. For our purpose with this meeting was to see the tenants and the power across Europe, right? So We have seen rising up for the tenant movement in Sweden, Germany, and in Netherlands at the moment. And of course, there is difficult to wrap these things up when you have this kind of events that's happening in Catalonia, Spain, and Portugal, where we have direct actions and maybe stronger national movement that doesn't have maybe direct demands yet, but still coming towards that for the big discussions that are taken over. And putting some demands for the politicians to think about. So it's really difficult to conclude in any way, but this is the first event, right, Kees?
Yeah, and we had also a few proposals. Knut has two of them. One was to work towards April to a new International Housing Day, which in the past, before Corona started, worked well as like a tool also to focus attention and also create all kind of international relationships between the movements. So we have a suggestion to start doing that for April next year again. And also something with the Vonovia tenants. Vonovia is going across the border, which is of course a threat to people that live in the houses that they buy up. But it's also like with capital and labor, it's also a possibility to create relations between tenants of Vonovia across borders. So that is something we want to work on. And Knut, can you say something about that?
Yes, first I listed the main topics I think that should be discussed deeper and further on. Cross-cutting issues, let's say, over the countries. So the one point was the tenant organization, of course. So the new grassroots movements, how do they organize? How did they came up? And obviously, in the three countries that have been here on the main scope here, there is a problem with the traditional tenant unions and the role and the relation to them or in them and inside of them. So that is a topic to be discussed further on, I think. Then we have the rent strike. This was very interesting for me. Also, all the links and information. So history of the rent strike and possibilities to reorganize real rent strikes. I think this is an important issue, maybe also combined with these bargaining practices. Yes, you reported from Catalonia. And yes, and then we have the big issue of rent regulation, rent caps. So we do not know the types of rent regulation. How can you achieve it? Also, there are consequences of rent regulation. So we believe that rent regulation is only an intermediate step towards socialization, because if you regulate strictly, the business model of financialization really is down, and then you have to take over the property. And it is not enough to regulate them. But there are many other points to regulate also. Then we have a big issue of the security of tenure, the temporary rental contracts that are usual in most of the European countries, not in Germany. So I think you cannot speak about rent regulation without speaking about the open-ended contracts and the security of tenant in these cases. The renovation also related to, so renovation means modernization and renovation that tenants have to pay higher rents for, and in fact it's only maintenance, and that also in the context of climate neutrality, achievement of climate neutrality for the business. This is a very big point, and this is driving the rents. Then we have the financialization and the corporations behind them. And I saw that beside Vonovia, Blackstone here is a big issue. So in our next meeting, on 27th, we should speak about Vonovia and Blackstone, maybe focus on that. And yes, I believe Blackstone is a step before the stock exchange. But what Vonovia is, Vonovia bought those houses, for example, in Spain from Blackstone. But Vonovia will not go to Spain because it's too risky there for them. And they are saying that so far. So then we have low, no profit housing corporations like the housing associations in the Netherlands, and how they get maybe can be part of the problem if they get financialized, as in the Netherlands, or a part of the solution via demanding a new legislation on tax-exempt no-profit housing companies. In Germany, this is also, so this is a success that we mainstreamed this demand. Then we have, yes, the meaning of socialization, that's why we're here in it, and expropriation under diverse conditions and circumstances. That it means different things under different conditions. So we have to figure that out. And then, yes, it was only played a marginal role here, was marginalized neighborhoods, demolishing of social housing schemes and so on. I think that's, and the related gentrification, that's of course also an issue, and we have to come back to that, especially if we speak about some countries in the Southern Europe and in Eastern Europe, where we also have informal housing and these things. Yeah, so these were the points from today. There will be many more. And yes, the proposal besides the research, this would be exchange and research about these topics to understand each one better. But yes, the idea for action was two. Then we have started to discuss that in Germany, the Housing Action Day, which is normally at the end of March, European Housing Action Day, that we should focus on, yes, our proposal would be on socialization, but maybe we say rent control and socialization. So to give it an approach, a direction, not just we are for the right to housing, but to give it to give it a direction and a demand, maybe also towards the European Union. And so this is the first thing. And in this context, of course, we want to highlight the problematic role of financialized landlords, yes, like Vonovia and Blackstone, end of March. And in April already, we will have the shareholder meeting of Vonovia in Bochum, here in my big city, and traditionally we are there. Yeah, we are disturbing, we are asking questions inside of a building, but maybe after the overtaking, so the Vonovia took over the second largest landlord in Germany, Deutsche Wohnen, and the expropriation campaign is directed, has the name Deutsche Wohnen and Eigner. So we have one big, larger landlord here, and also others are concentrating. And yes, and Vonovia is the main enemy, and we hope we can do some larger mobilization against this shareholder meeting, or besides this shareholder meeting. But there's a long way to organize that, and maybe we can stimulate something European around it.
Yep. And this will be in April.
That will be in April, the shareholder meeting of Vonovia. Probably we will have a conference, conference again. So far, it is on a Friday, so for travel, it would be, we need to raise funds for that, and then people have to stay overnight, of course, that who are coming from far. And then maybe on Saturday, we should have a conference on the role of this company, and the day before will be the shareholder meeting. And we are having shares, and we are inside of the shareholder meeting asking questions, and it takes most of their time to answer our questions. It is like a tenant, sometimes like a tenant assembly, meanwhile, because we are there, but we want to be more strong outside with the protest, if that is possible.
Yeah. Okay, so because that's still half a year, so we can help also to make this happen internationally. Mm-hmm. We have to cut it short here, but not before having Gwen van Eyck tell us all what is going to happen already in 2 days or 3 days. Gwen, call.
What do you want me?
I want you to do a one-liner on the Rotterdam demonstration.
A one-liner, okay. Yes, so we're having a demonstration in Rotterdam, woonopstand.nl. I just shared the website. We have speakers who talking about the housing struggle, and we'll have a march to the city center. We're expecting 10,000 of people. Not bad for the second national demonstration in 1 month. So yeah, we hope to see many of the Dutch viewers there.
Yeah, so if you know Dutch people or expats living in the Netherlands and they are your Facebook friends or whatever, then please let them know that this is happening and invite them to join, because this will be important, and it will also be a place where people meet and organizations can get people active and stuff like that. So yeah, I think we have to leave it at this. I wanted to thank only Milena and Linus from Rosa Luxemburg who have been behind the out of sight making this possible. And in 2 weeks time, I think on the 27th of October, we talked about it a lot also, one specifically about these international big real estate corporations, and try to find strategies to put something against them. So you're all welcome to join again, and please let other people know that we are organizing this. What more can I say? There's a website that we are using. Knut, did you put it in the chat? I think so. Huh?
Yes, sometimes now.
Yep. Put it one last time there, and because there you can have the announcement. It's also on the Rosa Luxemburg website. It already has a Zoom link. Okay,
so
thank you.
More important is the pad. So put your things. So some people are already doing it. Put it here into the pad, and we find all the links in the pad then. Yeah.
Yeah, we have this Rise Up pad where one of the things that he wanted is for all the national situations, people to make short descriptions of how the housing market, so to say, is organized there, and also how the balance of forces is there. And we can keep that and make it bigger and bigger. And also for the Eastern European countries, we want to add, yeah. So that the link to it is also in the chat, and will be in the recording also, I think.
We are working, so please help working out these questions. So there should be less, but I see that they are not complete. So we would be good and helpful to have good questions. Everybody can answer for his or her country or city. And then we get maybe a good overview, and do not have to repeat the same thing so often.
Yeah. Okay. Well, famous last words, and hope to see you again in the streets or online. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.